Empathy can be defined as the ability to recognize, understand, and to some degree even experience the feelings of another living being. And it's pretty well understood that people who have very low levels of empathy often have kind of a hard time in life. Our society is really pretty structured on our ability to understand one another and relate to one another. And people who to do that will typically end up with a mental health diagnosis, perhaps antisocial personality disorder, social communication disorder, autism spectrum disorder. Not in all cases, but in many cases, these are people who seem to have significantly below average levels of empathy, and they really struggle to correctly identify the emotional experiences of other people. And when we can't identify the emotional experiences of other people, our social functioning becomes severely impaired. And our world is pretty much built, for better or for worse, on our ability to function socially. What I do not see nearly as much discussion or documentation about is the fact that having an extremely above average degree of empathy for different reasons can be just as disabling, maybe even more so in some cases, than having an extremely low amount of empathy. Being too in tune with the feelings of other people can actually be a pretty miserable experience. And I hope this doesn't sound too cynical or pessimistic, but I think it's because the world is a broken place full of pain to some degree anyway. And the more in tune with that you are, the more you hurt and the harder your life becomes. Those of us with extreme empathy, we take on a really disproportionate amount of the feelings of other people. And especially when the people around us are suffering, that makes our own lives extremely difficult. Sometimes media has way too much adversity for us to enjoy it, whether fictional or real. We might experience chronic mood swings, a heightened level of stress just all the time. We're more prone to experiencing mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD. We might struggle to stand up for ourselves or be assertive with other people, even when they are being unreasonable, because we're so good at understanding where they're coming from that we can't even really completely be mad at them. And all of this stuff can absolutely shut us down. I could fill a multiple hour long video with my own stories about this. I'm not going to do that because they're all just variations on a theme, and I think that would get old quickly. I am going to share one with you just to give an example if the general information I've laid out so far just doesn't seem plausible to you. When I was 6 or 7 years old, probably, I was myself and my two younger siblings were being babysat by the two neighbor girls who were, I think, probably 4 or 5 years older, who I absolutely adored, by the way. Well, our parents took the boat out and went fishing. And we're all playing outside and having a good time. And if I remember correctly, we were all kind of doing our own thing. And I was just looking around in nature like I do, and I find this gigantic bug. I don't completely remember what it was or what it looked like. Looking back, I'm guessing it was a cicada or a June bug or something like that. It was huge. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So I called everybody over, my siblings, these two girls that are babysitting us. And, so they're like 10 or 11-year-old girls. They see this thing and they just start freaking out. Like they were screaming. And then they decided that they didn't want it to be alive anymore. So they started stomping on it. And I remember just being absolutely horrified to the point where I was like trying to stand, like use my body as a shield over this bug and trying to push them away while I'm screaming and sobbing. And I think I might have even hit one of them. My memory of this experience is not perfect, but I definitely do remember I was inconsolable for hours afterward. And I'm pretty sure that for several days afterwards, I didn't even want to see Carrie and Jody, the babysitters, who we were really good friends. So this was kind of a big deal. So my whole life kind of got shut down for a while because my friends stepped on a bug. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you listening can relate to that. And I'm not even trying to say that I was, for a child, considering my age, that I was unreasonable. It's just an example of how debilitating having this extreme amount of empathy can be in a world where it is uncommon. Like if we all had that amount, it would be fine because we'd all just be incredibly kind, caring, and cautious people. But we don't. We don't all have that amount. Most people in the world don't have that level of empathy. So if you do, you're going to nearly constantly be experiencing feelings and reactions and struggles that people around you probably don't understand very well. And like I said, my life is littered with examples like this, especially from childhood and early adolescence. At this point in my life, as a parent, as a therapist, I deal with a lot of big feelings all day long. And I think I've gotten to the point now where I'm pretty good at being able to handle what I consider to be a high level of empathy in myself in these high stress situations without having my life completely fall apart. So I'm going to share some of my strategies for doing that with you today. If you're also a person who experiences and at times disabling heightened level of empathy. The first, and it's probably no surprise that this is the first, but it is absolutely critical. Boundaries. Boundaries can look a lot of different ways. Boundaries can be limiting the amount of time you spend with certain people. Boundaries can mean limiting the topics you'll address with certain people. It may not even be with people. I have boundaries around media. There's certain types of like shows that I won't watch. I try to pretty much minimize my exposure to the news. If I absorb like this is basically what it comes down to. I know that if I absorb too much of other people's pain, I will shut down. And if I shut down, I'm no good to anybody. So it is more effective for me. I'm able to help. Not only do I have a better life, I'm also able to help more people who are dependent on me by holding that boundary and by keeping track of my own internal experience and by recognizing when I'm getting pretty close to that breaking point. And I do a good job when I know I'm close to that breaking point of saying, I need to be done for today. The rest of this day needs to be, as much as it depends on things that I can choose and control, as simple and lighthearted as possible. Because if it is not, I am about to hit my wall. If I hit my wall, I will shut down for a while, and that doesn't help anyone. So again, boundaries, we could do an hour-long video on boundaries. Boundaries is so many things, and a lot of it's going to be unique and idiosyncratic to your life and your relationships and your triggers. But please know you can and should set boundaries. You don't have to just be a 24/7 servant to everyone and everything around you, especially if you're a high empathy person. I know it might kind of feel like, well, that's what I'm built to do because like I have this gift or this talent or this thing, even though it sometimes feels like a curse that not everyone has. So shouldn't I use that to help other people? Yes, with limitations. Because if there's no limitations on it, you will burn out, you will shut down, and you won't be able to help anybody. So please figure out and apply what boundaries you need to hold in your life to keep your empathy as a gift and not a curse. The second really, really critical thing that I think you need to have in your life is some type of regular physical activity routine. That one might seem less obvious at first, but we know that when a person is absorbing a lot of stress or difficult emotions from other people or from yourself, it doesn't just impact your mind, it also impacts your body and your nervous system specifically. Stress, the brain handles stress in kind of a non-discriminatory fashion. All stress, whether it's your stress, other people's stress, whether it's like physical, social, financial, it all basically just gets turned into tension inside of you because your limbic system and your nervous system essentially interpret all stress as potential mortal danger. And so it sends signals to your nervous system that keeps you in typically a fight or flight response or sometimes a freeze or fawn response instead. But the more stress you take in, the more you're constantly on edge, not just emotionally, but physically as well. But here's the thing. If you're a high empathy person and a lot of the stress you're taking in is other people's stress and not your own, then there's no action you can take, right? Like there's typically, you can't take a physical action to solve somebody else's problem most of the time. So this energy gets built up inside of you to try to, solve the problem or keep you safe or whatever, except it's not you, it's someone else. So this energy has nowhere to go. I don't mean energy in like a metaphysical kind of way. I mean like muscle tension, increased heart rate, shallow breathing, like real physiological, these things prepare your body for action, for battle. And when that energy has nowhere to go, it just stays there and it's draining and it's miserable. So having some kind of regular physical activity routine and something that is maybe a little strenuous. Like I think this is important. You need to burn off the energy that you absorb from the world because your own actual daily life won't necessarily facilitate that. It doesn't have to be like high intensity all the time, but you might want to. A rule I keep for myself is whatever I'm into physically, I rotate what I'm doing a lot. Sometimes it's running, rowing, weight training, sports, but whatever I'm doing, try to make sure that at least once a week, I try to push myself kind of right up to my limit physically. And those days, once I recover from the physical exertion of that, emotionally, those are often my best days because it gets so much of this stuff out and I feel very refreshed and light. And I really think that regularly expending that physical energy is critical for us high empathy people. The third thing I think is really important is effective use of downtime. When we're stressed, when we're busy, it's really easy for us to fall into the habit of like frivolous or mindless downtime. Things that don't really engage your brain, things that require almost nothing of you because you're tired, you're worn out, it's been a busy, hard day, you've taken in a lot, and now you need a break, right? Yes, you do need a break, but here's the problem. Mindless, like unengaging downtime is not actually a break for your brain because it's not very interesting to your brain. And your brain has this negativity bias where it tends to prioritize problems or concerns or stressors higher than like good, fun, lighthearted stuff. So if you've absorbed a lot of stress in your day and you're trying to do something very, very simple and very like minimally challenging to try to counter that, what you might notice is you still think about the stressors while you're doing this hobby or this activity. And so your brain doesn't really get a break. Like you're not physically doing anything, but your brain is still kind of ruminating or cycling on like all this stuff that happened or that you heard or that you thought of in the day over and over and over again. And your mind, you can't really pull your mind away from that. You can't get your mind off the stressors. So your brain doesn't get to rest. It stays stressed, even though you're not physically doing anything stressful or strenuous. The way that you can counter this and give your brain an actual break is by doing things that are cognitively or mentally stimulating or engaging for you during your downtime. You do still want them to be low stress because if your day's just all stress all day long, that's not good for you. Things where the outcome doesn't really matter to you, but that you do have to stay pretty focused or pretty engaged with them in order to kind of stay present. These are really the kind of things we're looking for here. Things that really take up a lot of space in your mind, that really like demand your full or near full attention so that your brain can't just stay focused on the stressors all day long. And the fourth thing I think is really critical for us high empathy types is to try to spend time in nature as close to every day as possible. Because for the most part, unless you see something really weird, nature is usually a good refuge from all the stressors and all the problems that we absorb from the world and from other people in general. Just being out where it's calm and it's peaceful and there's just wind and trees and water, and birds. Usually there's no drama. Like again, every now and then you're out in nature and you see something, concerning, like maybe you see a deer get killed by a mountain lion or something. But these are uncommon experiences, right? Most of the time, depends a little on where you live, getting away from people and more into nature gives your empathy system a little bit of a break because you're not typically surrounded by pain and suffering that you can't help but absorb. You're usually surrounded by peace and calm and quiet. And that can be such an effective reset for your high empathy system. So those are the four things, if you identify like me as a high empathy person, that I would recommend you try to work on integrating to not become shut down or disabled by your own empathy. It can be a wonderful thing when you know how to use it and how to manage it, but it can absolutely turn into a liability if you don't know what to do with it. And I wasn't really trained on how to cope with it, so I'm trying to save you guys a lot of time and hardship, and hopefully you can learn from and apply my lessons to your own life and maybe skip some of the stuff I had to deal with. I hope that helps. Take care. I'll see you next time.